Welcome to my channel. My name is Sherrilyn. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am so glad you found me. Over here on my channel, I generally talk about true crime cases. Occasionally, I will sprinkle in a little bit of cults, problematic people and groups. So if that is something that aligns with you, I would absolutely love if you stuck around, hit the subscribe button, like, comment, all of the things. I love to say hello to you in the comments. So make sure that you have your notification bell on because I am usually pretty active in the comments the first hour that a video goes live. Okay, that's the whole spiel. Let's get started today. Before we do though, I have one more quick message for you. Thank you to our sponsor today, Beam, aka my nightly cup of cocoa heaven. I say it in every video that Beam sponsors, but I literally just cannot reiterate it enough how amazing their dream powder is. We've got new people coming on the channel every single day. So if you have never heard of Beam before, their dream powder it's basically a healthy cup of cocoa that is packed with all of the best ingredients to help you get the best sleep. There are tons of benefits from having a good sleep, increased focus being one of them, boosted energy, improved mood, better skin, reduced stress. And Beam delivers this through an array of flavors and formulas. If you are in the US, you have the option of powders with CBD, which I just cannot even imagine how effective they are because the non-CBD formula for me as a Canadian who cannot order the CBD formula, it's top notch. So I feel like you can just only go up from there. Brent and I look forward to our Beam every single night. We rave about it to everybody that we talk to. We literally went to a dinner party the other day and both were like, okay, well, we're gonna go. Can't wait to go make our Beam drink and watch our show. And everybody was like, what is dream powder? And then we sat there and talked about it because we just cannot believe how it works so effectively and then tastes so delicious. And it's only 15 calories, no sugar added, gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan, non-GMO, keto-friendly. It's just like this guilt-free, beneficial bedtime snack. Just in time for the holidays, Beam is 50% off right now. This is the only time that they do it. So if you have been wanting to try it out, I highly recommend taking advantage of their biggest sale of the year. Literally run, do not walk to this deal. It is usually $95 for the bag. So now you can get Dream for only $47.50. And like I said, this is their biggest deal yet. I know I've seen comments before that it is more on the pricier side for them right now, especially in the economy that we are in. For me personally, I prioritize it over other things that I might spend my money on just because it's worked so well for us. I mean, the numbers do not lie. In a clinical study, 93% of the participants reported that Dream helped them get a better sleep. And I personally, from firsthand, can attest that I've also had those results. Therefore, I adore it. I love it. If you want to check them out and again, take advantage of this huge offer that they are doing, you can click the link in my description or scan the QR code on the screen. The discount code is actually automatically applied, so there is no code necessary for today. Once again, you can find that deal through the link in my description or just by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thank you, screen. I tried to get past that one, but anyways. Got me. Anyways, thank you again so much, Beam. I can't say enough. Your continued support on my channel means the absolute world to me. For all of you who support Beam, supporting me, supporting the channel, it really means the world. So thank you so much. I love working with sponsors that I'm obsessed with. So thank you for allowing me to continue to do that. Back to the video. All right, the case that we are going to talk about today is one that is local to me and one that I actually didn't even know about until I saw it advertised on Dateline and then got super emotionally attached. I said this with the Johnny Altinger case. It is just so wild. And I know a lot of you can relate in the comments when I have covered a case that has been in your hometown or somewhere you grew up or somewhere you've even visited and are familiar with. That connection to it just instantly intensifies, and that's definitely what happened with me in this case. And it was just so weird to see roads that I drive on every day on video, and our police station and our homicide detectives, and then you just see Keith Morrison just cruising the street. I also didn't realize until this case like how obvious our Canadian accents were. There were some pretty strong ones on there, and then I can definitely see how it's obvious that I'm Canadian sometimes when people are like, oh, I love your accent. I'm like, do we really? Do I have an accent? Really? I heard some accents on this special. With all of that being said, while the case kind of starts in my hometown of Edmonton, Alberta, the manhunt spans to other cities and leads into the US with one of the most unbelievable twists that I have heard in a really long time. So the case we are talking about today is the case of Dwayne Demkiw. Dwayne Demkiw was born on July 7th, 1972. He grew up in North Battleford and Saskatoon before moving to Edmonton in his late 20s. According to family and friends, he was an avid scuba diver that worked multiple jobs throughout the year to support that hobby. A lot of traveling was required for it, and he loved it. It was part of who he was. So he would usually take off a few months during the year to scuba dive and go and teach others how to scuba dive. To support his passion, he worked as a FedEx driver that would often travel throughout cities in Alberta, primarily Edmonton and Calgary. And then he also had a job as a limo driver working for Revolution Limousine. And he was also known to DJ at local clubs in Edmonton. I tried to find some out. I would have loved to know if I had ever been at one while he was DJing. Basically, in every interview that I have read about Dwayne, he's described the same throughout. He was a live in the moment, very kind, considerate, being there for his friends, putting other people before himself kind of guy. He was also very easygoing, somebody who was really friendly and easy to get along with in multiple group situations. Those who knew him said they really never saw him in a bad mood. He wouldn't lose his cool. He was always able to just be level-headed, calm, and see the brighter side of any situation, just like a happy-go-lucky guy. Family was also really important to Dwayne on top of his friendships and business connections and stuff. He kept in contact with his family, even though that they still were living in Saskatoon. I think that's where our accents really come out, is when we start talking about the cities and the towns. It's very obvious just looking at photos of Dwayne with his family and his family as well that they were or are diehard Rough Riders fans. They're our rivals. Not as big of a rival, though, as the Stampeders. I think there's always the Canadian or the Calgary Edmonton thing. So I'll definitely cheer for the Rough Riders if the Elks aren't playing. So on May 30th, 2015, Dwayne's plans were to celebrate one of those very dear friends of his who was having her birthday party. I guess before the party started earlier on that day, he was also preparing for an upcoming trip to Disney World that he was about to take and very excited for. So in true to Dwayne fashion, as his friends and family explain, he was a work hard, play hard type of guy. So he was planning on meeting up with his friends for his friend's birthday. He met up with them in downtown Edmonton at a place called the Oil Lamp, then had to leave for a period of time so that he could go to his second job and drive a bachelor party around in his limousine. Work-life balance, baby. So he left his group of friends around 9 p.m. and then he planned on meeting back up up with them when the shift ended around 3 in the morning, he said. Driver logs show that Dwayne did pick up his party. There was a group of 15 men for this bachelor party, as well as a dancer that joined the group. Around 2 a.m., Dwayne dropped off the party, and then he also dropped off the dancer who he was familiar with. They were friends. They had worked together before, and he dropped her off around 2 a.m. He then sent a couple texts to his roommate between 2:48 and 2:55 in the morning, and he was shown arriving back at Revolution Limousine around 3 a.m. For about an hour between 3 and 4 in the morning, you can see Dwayne on his workplace surveillance, cleaning up the limo, getting everything all ready for the next day, which is what he did after shift, and then turning off the lights and appearing to leave at 4 in the morning. This piece of video surveillance of him shutting off the lights and leaving his work is the last time that Dwayne was seen alive, and it took almost 4 years to bring this case to trial and get justice. When Dwayne didn't show back up with the group or meet back up with them after his shift, nobody really thought anything of it. They just assumed it was a very, very late night for him. He was probably tired and probably just went to bed. So it wasn't until around 10:55 a.m. the following morning that a series of events unfolded that led to Dwayne's friends and family becoming very concerned for his well-being. At 10:55 a.m., firefighters were called to a fire that was in a parking garage in the southeast side of Calgary, which was 3 hours away from Edmonton. They arrived to a black Acura with its trunk kind of on fire. It was kind of putting itself out by that point. The vehicle was still running and had the keys in the ignition, but it was missing its license plate. Prior to the firefighters arriving on scene, there was actually a witness that had stuck around because they heard this loud noise coming from the parking garage and just instinctively whipped out his phone to record. And as he was recording, he captured an individual that was running from the scene, holding a license plate, and then kind of crouched behind this dumpster and took his shirt off, wrapped the license plate in that shirt, and then put another shirt on and just kind of like sauntered off and disappeared from the scene. Unfortunately, the individual was gone by the time first responders arrived on scene, but they were able to quickly identify that the owner of the vehicle was a 42-year-old Dwayne Demkiw. From what they could tell, there was no sign of Dwayne. He was not in the vehicle, not around the vehicle. So quickly they notified the Edmonton police. Once the police in Edmonton were notified, they contacted Dwayne's family by noon, and they just kind of gave them a rundown of what had happened, that his vehicle was found in Calgary on fire. He was nowhere to be found. And it was kind of like there was a speculation that maybe Dwayne had something to do with this. So they wanted to talk to him, and Dwayne's brother was like, absolutely not. Like there's obviously something going on. There's no way Dwayne would drive to Calgary and light his car on fire. So they set out to try and track down Dwayne all the way in Saskatchewan. Dwayne's dad ended up getting a hold of Dwayne's roommate and told him, hey, can you please knock on Dwayne's door and go in if he doesn't answer, because the police just called us and said that his vehicle's on fire in Calgary. When his roommate enters the bedroom, he can see that it was obvious that Dwayne hadn't slept in the bed the previous night. And he said that that was just a really helpless feeling. There was just kind of that gut instinct that something wasn't right. His car is 3 hours away on fire, very suspicious, not in character for Dwayne at all. And I'm sure there was that instant hope that maybe somebody had stolen it and it ended up there and they could just tell Dwayne because he was sleeping and didn't even realize, and that quickly was not the case. So word spreads very fast amongst Dwayne's friend group, everybody trying to get in touch with one another, specifically the people that were all together for the birthday party the night before. And the same feeling is amongst everybody. It's reciprocated through the entire friend group, everybody feeling really helpless. What, could we have done? The initial thought was just that he hadn't come because he was tired, and now was it because somebody was preventing him from doing that? So one of his friends decided to drive over to Revolution Limousine and see if there was any signs of Dwayne there. When he got there, he took several photos of the parking lot that was pretty much empty. He took photos of the door to the business, and as he was walking back to his vehicle, there was kind of like this little planter with a tree that was kind of outside of the business door, and inside of the planter was a black North Face cap and a sheath to like a large knife. So he takes photos of these things, goes and grabs some gloves, grabs 2 bags, and places these items each in a bag and brings them in his truck with him. He didn't really want to jump the gun and just assume right away that there was something sinister. So later that evening, he knew that Dwayne was scheduled to work his shift at FedEx at 8 p.m. And so he drove over there and waited, hoping to run into Dwayne and that there was going to be just some innocent explanation for everything. Unfortunately, Dwayne never showed up. So at this point, he took the evidence that he had collected from the limousine company and brought it to the police the following morning. Once police had the case, they started with basically interviewing friends, trying to get a feel for Dwayne's lifestyle, if he could have encountered or been associated with somebody that got him mixed up in something really bad. And everybody had the same common explanation for Dwayne, like absolutely not, no way. He was just a really, really good, decent guy, cared a lot for other people, worked hard, very hard, so that he could fund the lifestyle that he wanted, which required him to take a lot of time off. And he knew that he had to carry double shifts sometimes, triple shifts sometimes in order to do that. And he wasn't scared of hard work. At this point in the investigation, when the police had it, it was being looked at as a missing persons report. So Dwayne's friends had printed hundreds of flyers and were handing them out. There was also a billboard with him as a missing person. And I think a lot of them felt like, obviously, there is the police investigation going on. They know what they're doing their thing, but that they needed to do something as well. So they were kind of playing detective work as well. And one of the things that they did was they were able to access Dwayne's iPad and use his Find My iPhone app. And from there, they found his iPhone. It ended up being found badly damaged just off of one of our highways called Anthony Henday Drive. This is actually a route that links to Highway 2 to Calgary, one that this was like one of my old exits. Like I took it a lot. So they found his cell phone damaged just kind of down this embankment. They quickly notified the police, who came out, searched the area to see if Dwayne was anywhere near there. There is a lot of brush in that area. I'm very familiar with it, so it could have been a possibility that somebody could have been injured there or hidden there. And there was no sign of Dwayne. But once his cell phone was found, at this point, the case went from a missing person case to a homicide investigation on June 4th. It's quite interesting when I research these types of cases and just learn a little bit about the dynamic that happens behind the scenes, because there's different departments for everything, which kind of seems like obvious and a no-brainer. Like you have your traffic area, your missing persons department, and your homicide department. So, but all of them don't communicate daily together, working the same case all as one. Like everybody has their own stuff. So when somebody new comes on, it's kind of like learning the whole case. Well, it is learning the whole case from scratch and kind of starting from square one, which is what the homicide detectives in Edmonton had to do. At this point, they were able to reach out to the Calgary police station and learn a little bit more about what happened over there and how Dwayne's vehicle even came on the radar. Luckily for detectives, even though there was an attempt for a fire to be started and burn Dwayne's vehicle, down to nothing, it hardly did any damage. The fire was actually started in the trunk of the vehicle, and then whoever started it closed the trunk, so there was no oxygen for the fire to expand and grow, so it went out. When I heard that, it was like one of those moments where I thought about that meme where there's just like the person sitting in a bed with chips just looks like a disaster, and then you hear the quote of how the person got caught and you're just like, what an idiot. Yeah, one of those moments. So there was essentially no damage really that was done. A lot of the evidence was preserved within the vehicle. A few of those items were very telling, and specifically the amount of blood that was still visible. There were signs that there was like a cleanup attempt, but it was obvious that there was a significant amount of blood that was on the driver's side, in the back seat as well. Just to their eyes, looking at it prior to even forensics taking over, it was an alarming amount. There was notes that this was a significant amount of blood, and then once it was sprayed with luminol, there was actually a quote from one of the detectives that said, it lit up so bright that you could probably see it from space. Like, there was so much. So the amount of blood was unsettling and brought them very early on to the conclusion that whoever's blood this belonged to probably did not survive this type of injury. Finding out who that was, though, in the first place takes time, sending things to the lab and getting results back. And in this case specifically, they're just based on the time that this had happened, there was a significant backlog going on. So the investigators knew that at this point, like, everything that was going to be submitted, it was going to take quite a bit of time to get back to them. So they have no choice but to just forge on with other aspects that they do have control of in the investigation. And one of those things was going through the documents that they saw in the vehicle. And there was a lot of stuff in the vehicle. To me, I was just like, oh, this is kind of like definitely like a bachelor dude's car, like just tons of stuff in it. But there were documents in the back seat, and on some of those documents there was a reoccurring name, and that was Angel Shalafu. Angel turned out to be Dwayne's common law partner of 8 years. Detectives quickly learned that yes, Dwayne and Angel had been together for 8 years, but they had separated. And even though that they had separated, they had still remained very, very close friends. They spoke every single day, and they even saw each other, had dinner up to 4 to 5 times a week. Talking with Angel, they learned that they were so close that even a recent ex, someone that she had just broken up with only 2 weeks prior, named Robert Aubrey Maxwell, had a issue with how close Angel and Dwayne were. Even though they were broken up, detectives asked Angel, okay, well, do you think this ex potentially could have had anything to do with something happening to Dwayne? And she said she wouldn't be surprised. She said that it was no secret to really anybody within their friend group that Robert did not like Dwayne, even though the three of them and their friend group had socialized throughout the 2 years that Angel and Robert were together. He just always had this issue with Dwayne. And Angel said it wasn't really because of Dwayne in her eyes that things fell apart. She stayed with him for 2 years, just explaining like, hey, this is what it is. This is our collective friend group. He's a great friend of mine. There's nothing to be worried about. If we were going to be together, we would be together. And she said that her kind of end to the relationship was when he started showing signs of more control and more aggression. So it really didn't have anything to do with Dwayne. And even when she was trying to explain that it had nothing to do to Dwayne, Robert wouldn't really accept that. He thought that the fact that they were close was preventing him and her from being close, and therefore their relationship couldn't flourish. What's ironic is that Angel said that no one really in their friend group liked Robert. Dwayne also expressed concerns for Robert. He said at the end of that relationship and just the way that Robert was acting and treating Angel that he was really worried, and he was like, he believed that he could be the one getting a phone call from police or from the hospital saying to come and pick up your friend, she's been injured, or even identify her body. Like, he was that concerned for her. So when detectives ask Angel to kind of give a description of what Robert looks like, she pulls out her phone and says that she still has some pictures and videos and shows them. One thing that stands out to investigators is that there is mention in those clips of him wearing a black North Face hat. This is the same brand and same color that Dwayne's friend found the morning that he found out that Dwayne's car was on fire in Calgary and that he was missing, and that he had bagged and brought to detectives. Like I said, though, that had been submitted to try to retrieve DNA, but there was a backlog, so all of this was taking a lot of time. So in the meantime, detectives showed Angel the footage from that witness who had started recording after he heard a noise from the parking garage and had captured somebody running out of it with a license plate and changed their shirt. And when Angel saw it, although the footage isn't like up close of somebody, she just instantly was like, oh my gosh, based on the physical appearance and just like the physical mannerisms of the person on that video, she felt like it was Robert Aubrey Maxwell.
Oh, wow. God, I hope not. But would I pin that as him if I was walking down the street and think, hey, Robert? Yeah, I would probably do that.
So after speaking with Angel, detectives obviously want to speak with Robert Aubrey Maxwell, but were unable to track him down in all attempts. So now they basically had two missing people. So they go back through footage in Edmonton at Revolution Limo in the parking lot to try and not only just trace Dwayne's last steps, but see what was going on that evening in that area. Unfortunately, there was only one camera in that whole parking lot, even though there were several other businesses, and it didn't always pick up motion. It was one of those motion cameras, so it didn't run constantly. It only would start recording if it detected some movement. As they're going through the footage, they see at 11:10 p.m. there is a motion that is picked up. It's a dark figure that you see walking through the parking lot. Again, it's very choppy, very grainy, very dark, but you can see somebody that is walking through the line of the camera and then disappears. And a few minutes later, that same figure is coming back from the direction that it just went to, back to where it started from. And in the area of where this person initially came from, there is a garbage bin that you can see. And you see this individual walk up to that dumpster, open the lid, jump inside, and then close the lid. Then the camera just kind of stops recording. But on two occasions during like a couple hours, there is motion coming from that dumpster that triggers the alarm. And it's just basically the lid opening a few inches, and you can assume somebody's peeking out because they don't get out, but it's opening up and then it closes again. And that happens twice throughout a couple hour period. The next footage that is caught on camera is actually from the cameras inside Dwayne's workplace. And it's of him arriving back to return the limo and clean it around 2:50 in the morning. For about an hour, he is seen walking throughout the bay, cleaning the limo, and then he leaves at 4 a.m. Now, the gut punch to all of this is what would have happened is Dwayne left the business through the door where that camera was pointing at. So it should have picked Dwayne leaving at that point. Unfortunately, it didn't. There was never a motion trigger on the camera, and the detectives believed that due to a storm that happened in those early hours that evening, possibly the power was temporarily knocked out on the camera and it never activated, which I cannot even imagine how frustrating it is. It's so crazy when I share cases or talk about cases and something like that happens where it's like in the benefit of a situation where there's a victim and you're wanting to help them, and this is actually preventing that from happening. And another block that investigators were continually getting is that tracking Robert down was not an easy feat at all. Even people that they spoke to that knew Robert and were friends with him said that they didn't even really fully feel like they knew him in the 2 years that he had come to Edmonton and become friends with them. He never really talked about any friends that he had, a past life, where he had lived prior, where he came from. The only thing that people really knew, specifically Angel and Dwayne's friend group knew, was that they felt like Robert was a little bit creepy. And one of the examples that was given was actually from Dwayne's friend whose birthday he had attended the night that he had gone missing. And she said the group was at a different birthday party at some point during Angel and Robert's relationship, and Robert obviously came along. And during this party, they were at a nice restaurant, all mingling together. And she said that Robert was just constantly on his phone watching videos, and she went over to be like, hey, it's really rude, come interact and socialize. And she sees that he's been watching videos of people dying in car crashes for that evening, like while you're at a birthday party out socializing, it's like supposed to be socializing, you're just in public sitting there watching that stuff. So definitely threw her off, made her really uncomfortable around him. And the other thing that they really only knew about him is that he had his own business, his own company called Arm Glass Industries. One of his friends happened to have a business card for this company, and so they went to the address that was on the business card. And when they went to the address, it was a storage unit. So again, another roadblock trying to track this individual down because he wasn't at the storage unit. Now, Angel still had some of Robert's documents from their time living together and their relationship together, one of them being his passport that had his photo. So they were able to get a much clearer look and more, like government required look at his features. And they were able to go back to surveillance in Calgary from the morning that Dwayne's vehicle was found on fire and see that Robert Aubrey Maxwell was picked up several times in different areas of Calgary that morning. By the point that the Edmonton investigators are looking at all of this, though, there's a very slim chance to them that he is still in Calgary and hadn't been picked up again since. So investigators were able to locate roommates that had briefly lived with Robert Aubrey Maxwell, and they said that they had some of the items that he had left behind in his room. One of those items was a knife and a knife sheath, and this isn't just like a pocket knife. This is a machete. And this discovery made investigators feel like, okay, even though we're feeling like we're constantly getting roadblocks, we're on the right track. It's just kind of taking us some time to get there. And that's because the knife and this knife sheath that those roommates had provided to them, it was called the Gerber Senior. I believe this was like the knife brand. And the sheath that was found at the parking lot of the limo company that Dwayne's friend had provided to police, on that sheath it said the Gerber Jr. So this was like same brand and a set of these machetes, it appeared, with more, I guess, leads just kind of confirming that this is the person that they should be focusing on. Investigators were really trying to find a way to obtain DNA from Robert Aubrey Maxwell and test it against the DNA from the knife sheath and the hat found at the limousine company. So when they pull up a record search, they do find out that Robert Aubrey Maxwell had been arrested for an assault charge, which led to his DNA being submitted in the National Criminal Registry, which is a really exciting thing. It's a really huge break for them, but again, it's one that they have to wait on to get the results back from the lab to try to test the DNA from this database to the DNA that was on the hat. Now, another thing that the record search provided was the last known vehicle that was registered to Robert Aubrey Maxwell, and this was a white GMC truck. So they put out a flag on this vehicle, meaning that if the plates were ever run by law enforcement, there would be an alert that the Edmonton Homicide Department were looking for that vehicle. And 2 weeks later, that flag came up on June 14th, 2015. The abandoned truck was found in a parking lot in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is about a 12-hour drive from Edmonton. And the Edmonton homicide detectives were called by a police officer in Vancouver to let them know, hey, we found this truck in a parking lot abandoned and you have a flag on it. The way the truck was found was suspicious in itself, and that's actually what caught the eye of the police officer in Vancouver. It almost looked like it was an open invitation for somebody to steal it. The key was still in the ignition. The passenger window was open slightly, and there was a new iPhone that was just sitting in the cup holder waiting there. Inside and outside of the vehicle also, it was just pristine. It didn't look right, which is actually what the detectives thought probably deterred somebody from even wanting to take it. Like, it just seemed too staged that somebody was waiting and baiting a thief to come along and try to take it, and then they were just gonna arrest them. Unfortunately, forensically, it was also too pristine. There was no fingerprints that were able to be pulled on really any of the surfaces of the truck, nor the cell phone that was in there. Every surface that somebody would have touched was completely wiped clean. Luckily, though, and this is huge, in the back of the cab of the truck, the truck bed, I never know what to call it, investigators thought that they potentially caught a break. There was a small boat trailer that was just kind of tossed in the back of this truck, sticking out, and underneath that boat trailer was a opened plastic fork, and there was also a chewed up piece of gum that was kind of hidden. Just looking at the position and kind of the way that it, I guess, would have landed and settled, investigators thought that maybe they were hoping anyways, at least, that the driver of this vehicle had thrown this out while they were driving, hoping that it was just gonna fly off and never be seen again, and that the wind just pushed it back into the truck bed. The other thought, though, to be realistic and not get their hopes up, is that obviously this truck is in a public parking spot. It's quite open and obvious. It could have been a pedestrian that was just walking around and just kind of threw their garbage or spat their gum, and that's where it landed. So we know the drill. They send in those items, but they're going to take time. I can't imagine how frustrating this case would have been for detectives. I was really proud of the way that this was handled and finding out all of the things that were happening behind the scenes, though. They stayed very focused, very productive in those waiting periods of trying to get answers. So while they're waiting, they run the plate for the boat trailer. They're just kind of assuming that they're doing their due diligence, that it's just going to come back as Robert Aubrey Maxwell's. But they were surprised when the plates came back belonging to somebody that lived just in this Vancouver suburb. So detectives go to the address that is registered to this trailer, and the owner of that house says that they recently just sold a jet ski to somebody who purchased it from Edmonton and had Alberta plates. The description of the buyer from the seller was pretty on par to the description of Robert Aubrey Maxwell. And the seller didn't really have much information. The only thing he really said was that the buyer paid in cash, so there was no real paper trail. And the only question this buyer really had about the jet ski was how far it would go on one tank of gas. So this just kind of sets off a flurry of alarm bells for detectives, because they know that Vancouver is on the Pacific Ocean. And if you're just like travel the coastline, you can bypass the US border. So they used the same method that they had to trace the truck by putting a flag on it. And they did that with the jet ski, seeing if it would show up in the United States. Sure enough, when they searched this jet ski, it shows up on records that it had been reported abandoned. It had washed up basically like on the point of a peninsula that is just right past where the ferry is, and kind of like where it's the starting point, I guess, of the US territory side of things. So I guess it's like another breadcrumb that they're on the right track, but it's just all these like ominous, like the item is left behind, and then there's no one that you feel like you're getting closer to, but you're still like so many steps behind. Their next big break ended up coming 6 weeks after the jet ski was found, and it was results from one of those DNA samples that was submitted. It was actually the last items that were sent that came back first, which were the fork and the chewed gum that was in the back of the truck. The fork came back clean. There was no DNA that they were able to retrieve from it. And the gum did have usable DNA, and it came back as unknown male 1 DNA, meaning it did not match the DNA that was on file for Robert Aubrey Maxwell. This is something that they were kind of expecting. They had definitely had it, just to be realistic, on their minds that somebody could have just spat their gum out as they were walking by and it just landed in the truck bed. So they continue waiting for the next round of DNA results, and those arrive 4 days after the first round. And this was the DNA from the hat that was found at Dwayne's workplace. And these results ended up turning this case like, not, I don't want to even say like upside down, like spinning and spiraling down like the Twilight Zone hole of what in the shit. The DNA from the hat came back, and this DNA also did not match Robert Aubrey Maxwell, but it was a match to the unknown male DNA number 1 that came from the chewing gum in the back of the truck from Vancouver. So this shot investigators basically all the way back to the beginning of the case. Like, they had been picking up lead after lead that was pointing them in the direction of Robert Aubrey Maxwell, and just being like, it's just one piece of evidence after another. And now this DNA and one of the main pieces of evidence, that hat, is not tying him to the case. So who is unknown male number 1? Now, the initial theory is that Robert Aubrey Maxwell had an accomplice. There was that surveillance from the parking lot of the limousine company, and it was really dark and grainy. So there was no confirmation ever from that footage that it was Robert. But they didn't even know where to start, because all of the other surveillance video had only showed Robert, and everything seemed to be leading them to Robert. So they knew that the best thing that they could do for this case in that moment and to quickly move forward was to get fresh eyes on the case. And that was something that I was like, you go, boys. It was another proud moment. I was like, not letting their egos get in the way, and just like focusing on the entire mission, which was finding Dwayne Demkiw. So when they presented the case and give all of the facts, the first question that outside investigators have were, okay, so the DNA doesn't match Robert Aubrey Maxwell, correct? Right? But besides the driver's license and a passport, how do we know that Robert Aubrey Maxwell is Robert Aubrey Maxwell? And that was like a bomb going off. Because at this point, investigators had not spoken to Robert Aubrey Maxwell's family. They were trying to avoid tipping him off into the investigation, and making sure that they had enough of their investigation, especially that DNA, to make a case. So they track down his grandmother, who lives in Ontario, and his grandmother is actually the woman who raised him as a child. And she says that she has not spoken to Robert since 2012. The last contact she had with him was after he had moved from Ontario to Vancouver. He was living on the streets, and he had he was dealing with an addiction to drugs. So Robert was living in East Hastings in Vancouver. This is a very well-known area in Vancouver. A lot of homeless people there, a lot of addicts there. It's really gut-wrenching to see. And one thing in that area is that a lot of these individuals are quite known to police, not for like being, you know, dangerous criminals or anything, but just like frequently seeing them, interacting with them, maybe having to temporarily detain them for a short period of time. And Robert was one of those people. He was very well known to police in Ontario, even any city that he was in. He was known to police, dealing with interactions. And so once a week, police in Vancouver said that they probably had some form of dealings with Robert Aubrey Maxwell. And this was actually one way that detectives could kind of track the movements that he had had prior. So they're seeing, you know, though there are those consistent logs or reports, they're from Ontario and then moving all of the way to Vancouver. And this was a weekly occurrence, bi-weekly occurrence. And then all of a sudden they see in September 2012, no one dealt with Robert Aubrey Maxwell again. And nobody that was living on the streets that knew him very well saw him. He also had stopped communication with his grandma at this point. And she knew that just troubles that were in his life were keeping him from being in consistent contact with her. But she said that he would check in on her and let her know that he was okay. So when she stopped hearing from him in September, she got really concerned. And by February 2013, she actually filed a missing persons report. Now, when that report was filed, there was kind of a trail that was in there where police had gone to one of the last known shelters that he had stayed in, spoke to staff there, and they also said that they hadn't spoken to him since September, hadn't seen him since September, and that the last time he was at that center, he had cashed a check. It was a check from an Edmonton company called Architectural Glass. And that police officer at the time that was in charge of this missing persons report contacted that company and actually spoke to Robert Aubrey Maxwell and says, you know, hey, we have a missing persons report. Your family is worried about you out in Ontario, trying to get a hold of you. And the officer ended up closing the file when Robert Maxwell said, I'm fine. I'm living in Edmonton. I don't get along with my family. Like, I've cut myself off of my family. I don't want any contact with them. You know, please respect my wishes. I'm not missing. I'm fine. I just don't want to speak to them. And so he's a grown adult. They respected that and let his grandmother know. She was upset, but accepted it and was just kind of relieved to know that he was okay. And that was kind of how it ended. So it had been 2 years since that had happened. And so the Edmonton detectives sent the most recent driver's license photo of Robert Aubrey Maxwell to his grandmother to see. And immediately she looked at it and said, I have never seen this person before. This is not my grandson. This is not Robert Aubrey Maxwell. Sure enough, when they took that even further and looked at the booking photos from the arrest that had Robert Aubrey Maxwell's DNA on file from Ontario, that booking photo was not the person that was in this government-issued recent photo. So now they know that Robert Aubrey Maxwell is not the person that they are looking for. They are looking for unknown male 1. Again, like, how frustrating. Where do you even start? I learned a little bit about how DNA searches work through this case. Some of the stuff I didn't know before, and again, would have been so frustrating. So once detectives found out who the real Robert Aubrey Maxwell was, and that they are looking for unknown male DNA 1 and trying to put a name to this person, they wanted to run the DNA that they had through the FBI database. Now, the problem with that was that they were not able to run the DNA without a name. They couldn't just run the DNA and then see if a name came back. They needed a name associated to run it, which would be so frustrating because it's like, I have the DNA, I need the name. Like, I actually need you. That's why I need you to take the DNA to tell me the name. So they reach out to Washington State DMV because when they went back through Angel's interviews, who had been, I guess, the closest person that could have possibly known who this person was, even though she knows them like Robert Aubrey Maxwell and didn't know too much. She did mention that he said prior to coming to Edmonton, he had been in Washington State, spent some time in Vancouver, and then eventually settled in Edmonton. So they go to the Washington State DMV, and they provide the photo that they have from who they had believed was Robert Aubrey Maxwell's ID, and they request that they take that photo and run it through their facial recognition software. 25 photos ended up coming back, and they come back on a scale of 0 to 1, so it'll be like 0.02, 0, whatever, closest to 1. And one of them came back as a full 1 on the scale of 0 to 1. And this individual's name was Jason Stedman. In the photo, he had blonder hair, looked slimmer than what the photo they had, but looked pretty similar to unknown male DNA 1. So to be 100% sure, they sent the DNA that they had, now with the name, to the FBI to have them run it and confirm. Ultimately, the FBI came back and did confirm that yes, this DNA matches Jason Stedman. So Jason Stedman is who an unknown male DNA was. And learning about him opened up like a whole new can of worms and just kind of gave some insight as to how he arrived in Canada and why. So not only was Jason's birth name not Robert Aubrey Maxwell, it also wasn't Jason Stedman either. He was born Stephen Rory Preston. In the 90s, they found out that Stephen Preston had been arrested in Florida for burglary, grand theft, and arson. And after he was released from jail for those charges, he legally changed his name to Jason, and it was just Jason. There was no last name. He was just Jason, not just Jason. After changing his name in 2008, he moved to Washington State, and he met a girl out there named Jennifer at a singles club, and the two of them hit it off pretty instantly and quickly got engaged. Jennifer says that Jason was very charming. He was quite the charmer. He was also a very polite person, very attentive to her needs, her life. He was very curious and wanting to know a lot about her. He was chivalrous. He would open the car doors, all of those things. She really described him as like her dream guy. Something that really attracted her to Jason was his love for starting a family and having a family. She also wanted to have children, and this seemed like almost like even more of a priority to Jason. They had spoken about having children. She also said that she wanted to have them as well, and was really surprised like how eager he was to not only like just start trying to get pregnant, but preparing for it. Prior to them getting pregnant, they were collecting baby items. Primarily Jason was. He would collect baby items so that they didn't have to buy a bunch of stuff all at once and be kind of financially struggling if and when they got pregnant. The two of them did end up having a daughter together, and he is described as very hands-on and excited. Prior to their daughter being born, Jason and Jennifer got married when she was 3 months pregnant in Vegas. And when they got married, Jason took her last name, which was Stedman. Now, the reason he gave her for not having a last name of his own was that he said he wasn't close to his family. He didn't want to have ties to them and carry on a name and pass that along to their family. So he wanted to take hers and start like their own legacy. Jennifer said that once their daughter was born, everything that she kind of expected from him based on like his excitement even prior to getting pregnant was exactly how she anticipated it. He was very hands-on, very attentive to his wife, providing for them. They had a nice apartment, and he had a good job as a union delivery driver. According to Jennifer, though, that fairy tale period was short-lived. She said it was only a few months that had gone by where Jason started pulling away more from her specifically. He would go out with friends for hours at a time and just not tell her he was leaving or when he was coming home. She said that if she ever questioned him, like where he was, when he was coming back, or when he did come home, where were you? Why did you take so long? He would become physical with her. One of those incidences, she said that he choked her and threatened to take her life if she tried to take their daughter away from him. So she took that threat very seriously. She was terrified. In her mind, she wanted to leave, find a solution to this, this life that she's living in and doesn't want to be in, but scared to leave. So she stayed, trying to come up with a plan. A plan kind of came for her with no, she didn't really have a say in it. It was the day before Thanksgiving of 2009. Jennifer said as they were preparing to have dinner, there was a huge banging coming from their front door. She opens the door and she says that she opens it and she just sees 20 FBI agents staring at her, guns drawn. They've got the ramming bars, whole shebang coming at her. So they rush through, they're ripping the apartment apart. They have Jason in one room being interrogated, her in another being interrogated, and she's got no idea what's going on. So Jason was arrested, and it turns out that for 2 months prior to this happening, he had been fired from his job, something she didn't know, and something that he was not happy about and was retaliating against. So he was going to the building of his job and flooding the bathrooms. That ended up escalating to him mailing out threatening letters and mailing letters with white powder in it to the Seattle Times. And then ultimately he was making pipe bombs and placing them in newspaper boxes and got caught. Now the bombs ended up being dummy bombs, and the powder that was in the envelope was just cornstarch. But nonetheless, he was charged with homeland terrorism, and he ultimately pled guilty to sending threatening hoax letters and committing a pipe bomb hoax. So he was sentenced to 2 years in prison, and this opportunity allowed Jennifer to divorce him. Now, less than a year into his sentence, though, he was released and then put on parole to carry out the remainder of his sentence. And the first thing that he did was track Jennifer down and demanded that he have unsupervised visits with their daughter. She was terrified. She just had this gut feeling based off the threat that he had given her not long before he was arrested. And then with his record, he hadn't even finished his sentence, really. So she was so scared, and just that gut feeling screaming at her, that she went and filed for a restraining order. And this was something that he evaded. Every time that he was to be served with it, he would slip out and disappear. He was actually even taking night classes, and the person that was trying to serve him knew about it, would go there, and then he would just disappear and vanish. So the plan was to serve him at his next meeting that he was going to have with his parole officer. When the day came, though, he never showed up. Him not showing up obviously violated his conditions. And so the U.S. State Marshal started looking for him. And in their search, they find out that he was planning on fleeing. They were able to see that he was trying to purchase 2 bus tickets, one for an adult and one for a child. And when I heard that, that just gave me the chills, because it was trust those guts. That's your instinct. It's just screaming at you. It is so strong. Listen to it. I cannot even imagine what Jennifer felt like learning that he was looking for tickets for a child. She said after this incident, though, basically he vanished out of their life as well. It took a long time for her to feel comfortable and safe in her space for a long time. She said she had security from her work meet her outside of the parking lot when she arrived at work, escort her inside when she was inside, even like have an escort outside of the washroom for her when she had to go. And then at the end of the day, have somebody walk her to her car as well. Like, I can't even imagine the fear, even within their house, just triple security measures, having the alarms and cages on the window and like the triple lock. I don't blame her at all. It's exactly how I probably would have felt too. Little did she know, though, he was in Canada living this dangerous double life. Just from following trails and correspondence from Robert Aubrey Maxwell with his family, it sounds like Jason Stedman had started in Vancouver, where he ultimately met Robert Aubrey Maxwell. We know that it was 6 days after the last communication that Robert Aubrey Maxwell had with his grandmother that Jason had applied for a photo government ID card with Robert's identity. Now, investigators strongly believe that Jason didn't just meet Robert Maxwell and steal his identity, that the reason why he has vanished and never been heard from since is because he was most likely murdered. After arriving in Vancouver and getting official government ID, we know that Jason Stedman traveled from Vancouver to Edmonton. There he was able to get Alberta ID. He got a passport, a SIN number. He started his own company, bought a truck, a whole set of tools, and even had a bank account that had like over $40,000 in it. Just the fact that he was able to pull the whole thing off is just so terrifying, and then adds the element of like that, this being like my city, my hometown, and someone like this just lurking. Now, at this point, when investigators are piecing all of this together, Jennifer, she has no idea what's happened in Canada. She thinks that he has just fled because of a parole violation, and she is absolutely happy with that and him not trying to get access to their daughter. So Jennifer is shell-shocked when a couple months after what would have been Dwayne going missing, obviously she has no idea about that disappearance, but just for timeline reference, a couple months after Dwayne went missing, she's at work and she gets a phone call from her mom, who is at their home with Jennifer's daughter, and she says, "You will never believe it, but Jason just showed up here." He had been gone for almost 3 years. His daughter was just a baby when he left, and Jennifer's mother said that he saw their daughter. He asked her, "Do you know who I am?" She said no, and he said, "I'm your dad." And I'm just like, oh, I cannot even imagine the fear. The drive home, she said it was an 8-minute drive from her work to try to get home. She did it probably in like 5 minutes or under 5 minutes, and didn't, think that she could like drive fast enough, and that when she arrived, he would have taken her daughter. Thankfully, when she gets home, her daughter is there. But at this point, they went into hiding and she contacted the sheriff. Now they have the sheriff searching for him. So when they start their search, he's vanished again. This time it's only for 3 days. And on November 12th, the U.S. Marshal in Seattle contacts the homicide investigators in Edmonton to say, "You'll never believe who showed up here to turn himself in, Jason Stedman." Now, what's wild is he did not turn himself in as like Robert Aubrey Maxwell or talking about any of Canada stuff. He turned himself in for the warrant for skipping his probation. He said like he made a mistake. He wanted to do the right thing and carry out the remainder of his sentence and then be released and move on with his life. Really, I think what that translates to is that he knew that he couldn't easily get the documents that he did in Canada in the US and try to transfer being Robert Aubrey Maxwell or somebody else. And so he wanted to just like clean his slate as Jason and then move on. And he had no idea when he had turned himself in that Canadian officials hadn't even known the extent of what he had done or who he really was. So in December, he was sentenced to 7 months in jail for his parole violation. And it was at that sentencing hearing that he found out from the U.S. Marshal who stood up to talk to the judge and tell him that, he was going to be carrying out his sentence for this, but that just for reference, he is also wanted in Canada for first-degree murder charges, and that the plan is for Canada to extradite him after the sentence. And that was the first time he heard about Canadians, the Canadian homicide detectives knowing anything about who he really was. And allegedly he heard this and just like put his head down and shook his head. So he did serve his time in the US for the violation. He was scheduled to be released on June 11th, 2016. June 11th is Big Guy's birthday. I hate the birthday connections. So on June 10th, Canadian officials had served notice that they were planning on extraditing him. This was something that he did not contest. So extradition was granted on July 28th. Reflecting back on all of this, it just, again, it blows my mind. I know these people are anywhere. I know this can happen to everybody. And that's one of those common things where it's like, oh, you don't ever think that it can happen to you or to somebody that you know or in your hometown. And then when you process like something this chilling and like the lengths that this person went to get away with his crimes, like it just gives me the creeps and makes me so scared and weary of everybody around me. Like he had deliberately planted that hat and that sheath to be found at the scene of Dwayne's work so that it would lead back to him, but he's knowing that him is Robert Aubrey Maxwell and not Jason Stedman, and he's going to be long gone, living out his life in the US, finishing up his sentence, and then just getting back on with living. What's wild to think, though, is that if the real Robert Aubrey Maxwell's DNA had never been in the database for the charges, like his own charges, and that piece of gum was never found in the back of that truck bed, it basically is like a guarantee that he would have gotten away with everything, which is just bone chilling. What was really heartbreaking in this case is that 5 months after his arrest and 10 months after Dwayne had gone missing, it was on April 5th, 2016, a farmer and his dog were walking in his field on his property on a farm in Innisfail, and his dog had come across human remains that were kind of just off of their property in the ditch beside the road. And it was that discovery that brought a close to Dwayne's missing case. Sadly, the remains were Dwayne's. And although police had believed that just based on the amount of blood that was found in Dwayne's vehicle that he most likely didn't survive, there's always just that hope, you know, especially to loved ones, that everything is gonna be okay. I read that his parents had maintained a memorial for him outside of their house. They had a garden. They had pictures of him with candles and a banner that said hope, just hoping that he was going to come back to them. After Dwayne was found, I read a report that just absolutely broke my heart, but it showed a very, I think, powerful insight to the family that Dwayne was raised by. And there was a quote from Dwayne's father, Eugene, who was thanking the farmer for finding his son. He said, quote, "From the bottom of our hearts, my wife and I and the whole family would like to thank you for finding my son." And it just makes it so heartbreaking just to know that Dwayne just seemed like just such a great person, wonderful guy. I say this all the time, no one ever deserves something like this, but it's just those things. And there's just the innocence of that family of being thank you so much for finding him. They're feeling indebted to bring that piece of closure to their family and be able to give Dwayne a proper burial. When you read all that and then you find out what happened to Dwayne, it's sickening. And then it just gets you just rage and then you want to cry because he absolutely did not deserve it. He was the type of friend that wanted to be there for everybody and support everyone, was even kind to who he knew as Robert, but Jason, despite Jason not liking him because of jealousy. And we found out that Jason Stedman had used a machete that he brought to the parking lot, waiting in wait for Dwayne Demkiw. He struck Dwayne on the back of the head and neck, loaded him in the back of Dwayne's own vehicle, headed south towards Innisfail from Edmonton, and the injury was so severe that evidently he ended up bleeding out and dying in the back of his vehicle. Jason then dumped Dwayne's body like it didn't matter and headed on towards Calgary, where he set the vehicle on fire in the parking garage. He tried to anyways, thank goodness. He didn't know what he was doing, and it was able to preserve a lot of evidence. And then from there, he returned to Edmonton. We know that he spent 4 days in a motel while he was just trying to wind up his business, sell his tools, empty his truck. He also cleared out his bank account. From there, he drove to Vancouver, abandoned his truck, purchased a Sea-Doo, and then used that to re-enter the U.S. through Bellingham, Washington. Jason's trial in Edmonton, it started on January 14th, 2019. There was a lot of delays that were being pushed, which is so frustrating for family. I even just from covering the Sarah Hansen case recently, it just boils my blood that what family and friends have to just continually endure. And so Dwayne's case was one of those. When it finally went to trial, there was so much evidence that it lasted for 5 weeks to be able to get through all of the evidence and all of the witnesses. Ultimately, after deliberating for over 3.5 hours, the jury came back with a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years, which is the maximum in Canada. And he also has to serve a 3-year sentence for arson for lighting Dwayne's vehicle on fire. In my opinion, he's just an absolute monster. He's never, ever told anybody why. There's never been a motive, anything. The only thing that people who knew Dwayne and knew him for sure is that it was very clear that he didn't like the relationship that Dwayne and Angel had, and that he felt like he was the reason they couldn't progress their relationship closer, and that when they broke up, he blamed Dwayne for it. Imagine being that small and despicable of a man, that you are so insecure and jealous of somebody who is just mature enough to maintain a friendship with an ex who they still share all of those, friends, and they're just, they just get along. They're just friends, but you're that insecure, that jealous, that you decide that the best thing to do is kill them. It's giving energy. You know what I mean? And sadly, he also has not really even addressed Robert Aubrey Maxwell. Jason's brother did tell investigators that he had had some ominous talks with Jason. Jason, while he was on the run, actually had reached out to his brother and said that he was going to be stopping by, that there was some stuff going on, and he was in hiding and not to tell anybody. He didn't get into specifics, but he said that when Jason came out to visit his brother, he said that he got mixed up in some bad stuff. He had to take on a fake identity that he got from the dark web, and he said that based on those conversations, he believes that if Jason did something to Robert, he believed he would have disposed of him in a sewer. Didn't really give context into that. He just said he likes sewers. So my understanding is that hasn't really gone anywhere. And from what I know, investigators believe that he actually probably placed him in a dumpster in a back alley because that was a lot more accessible. And if that was the case, then Robert's remains would have been brought to a landfill, and at this point, the sad reality is he would never be found. I saw that there is a memorial for Dwayne that is actually on the route to Calgary. It's a route that my family and I take several times a year. I never knew about it, so it's absolutely going to be something that I look out for, and every time I drive by it, I want to think about Dwayne, and not for the reasons he's taken, but the person that his friends shared and remembered. And if you are on that path as well. I encourage you to look out for his memorial as well. All right, you guys, that is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.